Okay, here we are. So the conversion itself then. The parts come in these cages, very robust packaging, and yeah, no damage at all from any of the parts. Cleanup, you do have to be careful. So this 3D printed resin tends to be a little bit more brittle than cast resin. It's less forgiving, so you do have to be careful. Various tools and techniques you can use to separate the parts. Here I'm using an old set of side cutters for the propeller blades, but actually some of the attachments, such as these blades, mean that you can just snap them off with confidence, but I definitely don't recommend doing this for everything. Getting there with a sharp scalpel blade on this is the carb intake, and it's relatively easy to remove these parts with these supports. The actual attachments are quite small, but there's lots of them, so that's where the strength and robustness comes in, is just the number of attachment points, and you can just go in with the knife and just cut through them. As I said, it's quite brittle, so just do be careful. Make sure you're snapping the supports away, you're not snapping the part. And then the cleanup is relatively simple. You get these little dimples left over, and you can just cut them and sand them until they've disappeared. So just like this, just going in there with the knife and just cutting away just the remnants of the supports. And there we go, that's that part separated. The nose has got lots of supports on, as you can imagine, and it's easy just to clean up some of the remnants away, so you can get in there with the razor saw and just start slicing through. Again, just being very careful, just taking your time, moving around the part, and then eventually it just comes away, and we can have a close look at the nose. Beautifully printed, that. Okay, taking a deep breath, and yeah, measure twice, cut once. The instructions are clear enough, and it's along the panel lines. So the Spitfire, it's not one continuous panel line. There's a sort of kink in it which complicates things. So I went in with an ASK razor saw here on the finer setting and just cut away the fuel tank. The tail is a little bit more tricky. It's along the panel line at the front, so that is fairly straightforward, but the horizontal cut is along the tail plane attachment point. So there's no panel line or anything there, and I just eyeballed that. So I cut it about halfway, and then during the test fitting in the fin you can go in and tweak it with sanding sticks and that kind of thing. So yeah, just going along the panel line. You have to be fairly careful when cutting along panel lines, because obviously the width of the saw means you might end up taking away a little bit too much material, so it might be advisable to cut just inboard of the panel line, and then using files and sanding sticks just take that along to the edge of the panel line. But it works for the tail. So going in there, just cleaning things up with the scalpel blade. But it's not finished yet, because there's this little sort of guide tab thing. That means it's easy to get the fin in the middle, but you do have to remove some material from just the very back end of the spine, so it's quite easy to move too much. Right, decided to modify the spinner to take a magnet, and as you can see it's all glued in, and that should just snap in place. Sorting out the panels now. The instructions would have you remove the new radio bay, and replace it with a plug. I thought it would be easier, if I'm honest, to just mark out where the rivets go, fill in the rivets, sand it down, as you see, with black super glue, and then use the template rather to cut out the panel as a scribing template. And actually, I think it worked really well. I think for me, it gives a very neat finish. So this is just a needle in a pin vise, and I'm just going to go round and round and round until I think I'm happy. Lots of tape holding that template down. There is a little guide on the back to make sure you get it in exactly the right place. And then we can just polish that, get rid of any burrs, get rid of any of the sanding dust, and then eventually go in with a bit of extra thin just to sharpen it up. And actually I thought it worked really, really well. The only thing you will have to do is replace the rivets, and I just use the actual supplied plug as a bit of a guide to have a look at the rivets, and just added them in with a rivet tool. So I use the quick setting stuff, which I prefer. And you can see how neat that looks. And then here we are going in with Rosie the riveter. This is a double wheel because it was 2 rows of rivets, and it's much easier obviously to get a parallel line if you've got 2 wheels in the rivet machine. Just a bit of stuff in there to make it black so you can see. I forgot the word there, wash. Okay, this bit I'm less enamoured with the design choice here by Matthew. There's a cutout for the windscreen mount. Now I know why he's done it, and it explains in the instructions that there's a recess there, meaning you can go in and put a plastic card in there, and I've used a bit of black plastic card, and then I just sanded it to shape so you're not using super glue to attach the canopy. Yeah, I'd rather use a different glue. But anyway, it worked well. Now I've got to convert the C-wing into an E-wing. So this is the Spitfire Mark 8 wing, which is good because it comes with the short ailerons and the fuel tank in the leading edge. However, it's C-wing configuration, and I needed an E-wing. So you don't have to do this if you're going to do an earlier a C-winged Mark 14. But I was doing a late war Far East one. I desperately tried to find a C-wing in the Far East, but couldn't, so had to do the E-wing conversion. Take a slightly different route with the bubbletop, as you'll see at the end. But these plugs fit really well. Takes a little bit of fettling, as you saw, and you can see the stress marks in the corners there. That little tab has to go. Bit of a gap on the other wing, which was a bit of a pain. So I just added a plastic card shim and then added that in. So yeah, it fits well, but you have to be really careful. You could go down the aftermarket route and just have the E-wing open gun bay, or you could buy the Spitfire Mark 8, Spitfire Mark 9E, which has just been released as I record this, and modify the wing, and I'll show you how to modify the E-wing later. Okay, carb intake, that needs to go. That needs to be flush. And the various lumps and bumps as well, because a lot of the airplanes didn't have the 303 guns installed, but they kept the panels, but the panels were flat, so all the little bulges for the guns were removed. So just polishing that back up. It needs to be nice and flush. The main airframe resin parts were painted in just an alclad aluminium colour. Anything will do. And then if I give a light polish, you'll see you'll just be able to reveal the printing lines. Under the metallic paint, you can't really see it, if I'm honest. It's so well printed. But, you know, belt and braces, let's go in and let's just polish with a very fine sanding sponge. And there you can see the printing lines there, but that's only because I've sanded it. Under the metallic coat you couldn't see it. So just going in there and just polishing away those mould lines works a treat. Gluing the fuselage using the Ammo Black super glue. These applicator things are absolutely brilliant, really precise, and we can just run a bead of glue along, squeeze it together. Now you could just leave it to dry and then sand it, but I tend to hit it with the accelerator. The disadvantage of hitting it with the accelerator is as it cures, it's an exothermic reaction, so it does get warm and it does produce a little bit of gas. So sometimes you do get some little sort of pinholes in there, but normally Mr. Surfacer will cope with that, or just another sort of layer of black glue over the top will normally fix that. And then we're just going to use these display sanding sponges and we'll just go in and polish that back, finishing with my favourite Miracle polisher. It's well worn, and then going in, restoring all the detail. You've seen me do this lots of times before, using a very fine razor saw here, which is at the same sort of width as the kit panel lines. Just slowly gliding it across, no pressure at all, just using literally what little weight there is of the tool to do the job, and multiple light passes so we can match it with the kit panel lines, and it works an absolute treat. Again, that will be polished away, and then a bit of the quick setting glue just to melt away any rough edges and any stubborn sanding dust. Main event now, putting the nose on. The design of this is brilliant because there's various sort of channels and bits and bobs on the inside of the nose, and the part has various lumps so it can fit in and around that. And there we are. It just really just clicks into place. It's absolutely brilliant. So this is just a dry fit at the moment, but we'll go in with the glue and those extra long applicators, and we'll glue it from the inside because that is the neatest way. You could glue it on the outside and then use some of the super glue remover to tidy things up, but no, I prefer to glue it on the inside. Right, this little scoop goes on the top. You can see underneath I've added the carp intake. Now the fit of these is absolutely brilliant, and on this one, this is the method that is called out in the instructions. There are other methods available, and you'll see that on the bubble top at the end where I did it slightly differently. So going in there with these glue applicators, really handy if you're going to do that. Just touching it with the accelerator, and then you can go in with 5-minute epoxy afterwards. I didn't on this one, actually. I was brave. I just left it with the super glue. The black stuff is sort of rubberized a bit, and it's less brittle than your standard super glue. Even though I was trying to be nice and neat, I did get a few little smudges of super glue on the airframe, and we can just easily remove that with some of the super glue remover, and that will tidy things up nicely. Good stuff, that. We'll just polish that away, cleaning things up. The airframe will get a wipe down with isopropyl alcohol at the end, just before paint. Just trying to neaten things up here. just a very, very slight gap on the join. So literally just a smear, that's the word I was looking for before, for the super glue over the seams. A smear of Deluxe Perfect Plastic Putty. It's all water based. Using the tape there because the detail's really fine, all the rivets and fastener detail. Don't really want to fill those in if we can help it. Just rub it with a finger. We'll let that go off just very shortly, and then we'll just go in with a moistened cotton bud and just neaten things up. Tailplanes go on, they're glued together, and then the fin can just fit over the top. You see what a good fit that is as well. Again, it's never going to be perfect, so just a bit of Mr. Surfacer, and we'll just seal the join. That's all it is, it's just sealing the join. There's no real gaps there at all. And I tend to use Mr. Surfacer on all my joints anyway, on pretty much every kit. Right, so wing to fuselage. And again, this is in accordance with the instructions. However, what I do recommend is not what I do here. You can see there's no wheel wells in here. And then I had to build the wheel wells when it was in situ, which was a pain. Do the wheel wells first and then do this. So you can see that was the dry fit. It goes in beautifully, and then we can just super glue that in on the nose on the front, and then just use normal cement for the plastic to plastic parts. You'll also note on the wings I've blanked off and filled in the shell ejector chutes. Again, that's easy for me to say. Yeah, for the 303s, because obviously they're not required. Actually, I just said I used normal glue for plastic to plastic. That was on the other one. So clearly on this one, I'm using super glue for everything. The drying time is such that you do have working time. It's fine. Make sure you do put a bit of glue on the bottom of the carb intake, and it just slides in the front and then just snaps into place. And then we can just hit that with a bit of accelerator, and then that will just set rock solid. Okay, here's the tricky bit, because I'd forgotten to put the main spar in. Yeah, so my recommendation is do all this work first, because it'd be much easier. It was a bit of a fiddle to get that in place with the lower wing glued onto the fuselage. Bit of a pain. Not impossible though, as you can see. It's just, yeah, I'm having a bit of a faff and a fiddle, as you can see. And we'll just use some pegs just to clamp that down, because that is going to set the dihedral. Now for the wing halves. Now I made a bit of a mistake on one of these in that it didn't quite line up properly. So I ended up with a bit of a gap on the sort of where the wing well attaches to the upper fuselage. Yeah, so that was a bit of a pain. So if you are going to do this method, just make sure everything does line up properly, and you didn't miss that, which is exactly what I did. I went in and fixed it later. I just had to carve very carefully with a scalpel, tip of a scalpel, just carve a few little bits away just so it would sit down flush. So this one's going to have the extended wingtips. So exactly the same as the kit. Well, it is the kit parts as the wing was designed. That just fits in. Again, I just used a smear of Mr. Surfacer. Actually, I had a few little gaps here, and I always have on the Eduard Spitfires with the standard wingtips for some reason. I always end up with a slight hairline gap. There we are, and there is the shape. And ain't it lovely? It's lovely. Right, radiators. A little bit confusing here. I think the instructions could be slightly clearer because there are two types of radiator. And I don't know if one is left or right, or whether they're just two separate designs. It's not exactly clear in the instructions, I don't think. But anyway, I built them all up, and then I just used the best fitting ones where they went. So it might not strictly be as accurate as it should be, but I went over fit over accuracy, if I'm honest. So I'm just wondering if if they're handed. A little bit of this metallic dry brush paint, the acrylic stuff paint. New word there, paint. Just goes in and highlights that detail. Again, lovely stuff. Advisable to paint the insides of the radiators, the medium sea grey, or whatever your underside colour is going to be, probably medium sea grey, first. Radiator doors, even the little actuator is present, which is nice. And then after some dry fitting, they can go in. Fit is good. I'd say it's good. Not great, it's good. So just a little bit of filler required. Now, for the nose joint, I left off this joint. I didn't glue this until near the end. The contact area is quite small, and I had a slight gap. So it's just where I removed possibly slightly a hair's width too much material using the razor saw. But now we can go in and can finally glue that. But I would, when doing this, test fit the windscreen at the same time. Again, we'll use a smear of the perfect plastic putty. We'll just work that in with the tip of an old blade, and then that just tidies up the joint. Bit of a focal point is the cockpit in any model, so we're taking your time to get that looking neat, I reckon. Out with the wow stick, just drilling out the gun barrel ports, because I'm going to use the brass gun barrels on this from Master, and that's going to be a lot stronger. On the bubble top, I used the plastic parts, which work fine, thinking I didn't have any brass barrels, and then obviously when the project is finished, I found the brass barrels. Brilliant. Anyway, I can do that on another project. Okay, Vatform canopy now. This is the Rob Taurus, arguably the best in the business. I don't normally use Vatform canopies, but for the Spitfire, for the opening bubble top canopy, I think it's well worth doing. The kit part is obviously limited by injection molding technology, or certainly was at the time, and it's a little bit too thick, a little bit too bulbous, and doesn't quite sit right, I don't think. But using this Vatform canopy, it sits much better. Now, here's something I forgot to do when doing the fuselage, was remove the radio hatch, which was obviously moved to the other fuselage, but that was a simple job. And that's it. That is the razorback conversion finished and ready for paint, which will be in the next episode. But what's coming next is just a little addendum, just so I can show you the differences with the bubble top. So this is going to be an FR14, so I do the reconnaissance mods as well, so you'll see that. Right, the kit is based on the Eduard Mark 16, which has a fixed tail wheel, Now the instructions say get a spare Mark 8 fuselage and cut the tails off and graft them on. But I thought I would have a go at just converting the fixed tail wheel to a retractable tail wheel. I made a template from spare Mark 8 fuselage that I've got and used that to cut this out. Now I think personally this is a neater job for me. Others may differ. You may prefer to cut the tails off and graft them on, but it's entirely up to you. But I was very pleased with how this turned out, just using the Mark 8 parts as a guide for the extra panel lines and things like that. So there's this circular inspection hatch and another panel line at the back, but yeah, I think that was a success, so I'm very pleased with how that worked out. So this is the reconnaissance mod. Chain drilling the hatch, and then we'll cut that out, and using various files we'll carve it to size, and then we can replace the FR hatch. Slight gap here and there. I used my circle cutter just to scribe a circle in some clear acetate, and then cut it out with scissors, sanded it to shape, and that fits quite nicely. Okay, the wing mods then. So this is the Mark 16 wing, which is an E-wing, but it's based on the Mark 8. So if you've got the Mark 8, if you've got the Mark 9 E-wing, you'll have to do the same. So I scribed in the leading edge fuel tank and scribed in the filler cap, and then added the rivets, and I was pleased with how that turned out. So just being very careful with the rivet here, not to go outside the lines, and you can see, yeah, that looks quite good. Pleased with that. Now for the aileron mod. So the Mark 14 had the short ailerons, so don't believe the Valiant book. The Valiant book is wrong. It had never seen a 14 with long ailerons at all, or an 18 actually. So just using the short ailerons in the kit as a guide, cutting the long ailerons up, and then using the outer portion to build up the wing. So they was glued in place, and then this is my putty of choice. I love this stuff. This is the Mr. Hobby epoxy. I think this might be the Superfine. That was spread over the top. You can see the clip wingtips have been glued in place. Smooth that in with a wet finger. It's hydrophobic, so it's not like milliput. You won't dissolve it with water. We'll just leave that overnight, and then coming back the next day when it's fully cured, we'll come and sand that to shape. So we'll sand it, we'll polish it, and then we'll go in with the rivet wheel, and it worked really well. Okay, wing to fuselage now, so you can see the difference with the last one. I've actually built up the wings completely. I thought it'd be easier because I've got to do all those modifications, especially to the ailerons. I thought that'd be easier to do it with separate wings. And a little bit more of a fiddle to get the wing into place, but it will go. So you can see I've got the carb intake glued in on the nose, and as before we can slide this in. Now it's going to be a bit more of a tight squeeze because the upper wings are obviously in place, but with a bit of jiggery and a bit of pokery and a bit of manipulation of the wing roots, it all just snaps into place and works very well. So you can do the first method, which is what Matthew suggests in the instructions, or this method, and it works. Out with the blue clamps. Might be a video without the blue clamps somewhere, and that's just holding the pressure so I can match the contours of the upper wing, and we'll just let that set, and that's it. Conversion complete. Next time, painting and weathering.